Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you today to this webinar on the impact of intellectual property on research and development and the economy. The speaker today, Mr. Douglas Graham, is a very well-known figure in this field, and he's the author of the book titled Ideation, the Birth and Death of Ideas. Mr. Douglas is the CEO of Global Ideation. Ideation is a software solution and repository to manage and keep your ideas and inventions safe, secret, and confidential, while being able to share, market, and promote your ideas with others without compromising your confidentiality. This webinar is for the Middle Eastern audience, and I hereby recall from my discussion yesterday with Mr. Douglas about the role of IB in boosting the economy. As you may all know that the majority of the Middle Eastern countries depend on oil as the main source or main resource for economy, which is an unsustainable resource that a few days ago was sold for minus $37 per barrel. Mr. Douglas mentioned that IB could help to create new economic opportunities, and I will let him explain that later in his presentation. He also asked whether to include or not a slide on the inventions in the Arab region, and I insisted on keeping that slide as a reminder and a warning sign that we should resume our work on innovations and create new resources for our economy, sustainable resources for our economy. However, with the advances in technologies nowadays, working on innovation has its own challenges, and one of them, or one of the major challenges, is the intellectual property. Unless it is set out quite clearly in a written agreement, there can be confusion, uncertainty, and disputes relating to the identification of the owner of the IP rights in certain circumstances. Such disputes may delay any progress toward publication of academic work, research and development project, or even the communication. Today, we have more than 1,500 participants registered for this webinar, and that's why we have the technical difficulties at the very beginning of the webinar. And I took most of the questions and I grouped them because I allow people to send questions in advance. And what I will do at the end of the presentation of Mr. Douglas, I will ask the questions, and then I will let the audience, you can write your questions whether in English or in Arabic, I can translate them directly. So Mr. Douglas, the virtual stage is yours now, because now we are living in this virtual world. So I will mute my microphone, and if you can share your screen just to make sure that everybody can see it.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen now.
Yeah. الأخوة الحضور, let me just ask them in Arabic. تقدرون تشوفون الشاشة؟ إذا تقدرون تشوفون الشاشة وتسمعون صوت المتحدث فقط اكتبوا نعم إذا تسمعون. Oh yes, yeah, and people can hear you and can see the screen. So I will mute my microphone now, and then you can go ahead with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you. And as Zayed's mentioned, we're going to be talking about intellectual property and how important it is for economic development. We see that this has shown up in research on individual companies that's shown there's a strong correlation between their investment in research and development and their subsequent economic success. And there have also been studies that shows that this applies to nations as well. The more a nation invests in intellectual property and research, the better it does in terms of its GDP. There was one study in the US that looked over a time period from 1995 to 2002 and determined that the growth over that period, 6.5% of it was due to the intellectual assets, and only 2% of it was due to the physical assets, the tangible assets such as buildings and infrastructure investment. There was Chinese research that found a very strong correlation between R&D investment and GDP in China. And there was also a European study that found that regions that allocate more than 3% of their GDP to R&D have an unweighted GDP per head 21% above the EU 25 average, whereas 6% for those investing less than 3%, they were 6% below the EU average. So, you know, as you know, with economists, one can never quite be sure, but there does seem to be fairly strong indications that R&D is a very important investment for the nation state. I mean, it's you could say two of the major assets that the Middle East has. There's many others, cultural, religious, but in particular, you have oil and you have your ingenuity. And today we'll be talking more about the second one, the ingenuity. So let's look at the topic of the last slide, the levels of investment. So this shows the levels of investment for different countries. And the bad news is that the Middle East has been very low on this. You know, it was a few years back about 0.2%, whereas the average is somewhere around about 3% investment. But the good news is it has been ticking up. So I'm probably not the only one discussing this topic. There has been significant increase in the level of investment in the Middle East and in higher education. You know, we've seen major universities being built. And of course, this comes from, as I said, a long tradition of innovation and invention in the Middle East. And I'm told the University of Cordova was the first institution of higher learning in the world. And early inventions have included what I view as one of the most fundamental ones, the concept of zero, which really enabled all of mathematics and has profound philosophical significance as well. Algebra, the concept of using X as the unknown, that apparently comes from the Arab word shay, and forgive me for not pronouncing that correctly. Coffee, sugar, sherbet, lemonade, all the good things. Astrolabe, to plot and anticipate movements of stars. Many of the tools of medicine, including the all too familiar syringe. And Avicenna's canon was the foundation of modern medicine. However, as we said, in recent history, the emphasis on innovation has slipped. And a few years back, you had one of the lowest proportional to GDP investments in R&D. This also reflected in issuance of patents and similarly awards of the Nobel Prize, although you did get the chemistry prize recently. And obviously this is a concern because of the strong relationship between R&D and GDP that we've discussed, and the general need to diversify economies so they're less dependent on things like oil prices, which I had just mentioned, hit the remarkable minus 36, I think it was. They also need to hedge against the impact of technology on things like oil price, although we've already seen it dip disastrously. This is just a temporary dip. But there could be longer term concerns such as fusion energy. With fusion energy, everyone's been saying we're just 10 years away for the last 30 years, but maybe this time we really are just 10 years away. And obviously that would have a profound impact. Successful, viable, commercial fusion energy would bring down the cost of energy and take away much of the need for oil. And of course, you know, there are finite reserves and there is increasing environmental pressure against using fossil fuels. So all of these are trends and concerns that further emphasize the importance of R&D. And I know I'm talking to an audience that is probably already well aware of its importance because you to a large extent are the creators of this R&D. So let's talk about the process of creating it and how to protect it. And this has been our emphasis, basically. One last comment, though, on the economics of it, I think to emphasize how inefficient intellectual property is if you consider it as an industry. When we look, I took the liberty of creating a global balance sheet and a global income statement. It's on the balance sheet is on the organizational assets. And there's a substantial amount. Let me move my Zoom icon to see. Yes, about $69 trillion in total assets on the right-hand side, which is equivalent to about intellectual assets accounting for about 80 to 87% of the economy. So it's about 60 trillion in intellectual assets. But when we look at the income statement on the left-hand side, we've got about 41 trillion in global income, of which only 365 billion, that's less than 1%, is income derived from royalties on intellectual property. These numbers come from the World Bank and the Bank of International Settlement. So in short, what we're saying is intellectual assets account for 80 to 85%, say, of global value, but less than 1% of global trade. So this is the interesting question. Why? So when we start looking down at the detail a little bit, the lower part of the iceberg here represents the unseen intellectual assets. The top part is the proportion of physical assets that we can actually see. So when we look at the intangible assets, there's various data points that indicate why they play such a small role in the global economy and could play a much larger role. For one thing, less than 1% of patents are ever licensed. And this comes from 3 different studies, one in academia, one in commerce, and one in government. And all of them, the number came out to about the same, a little bit less than 1%. In the corporate world, everyone's supposed to be reporting now under the new accounting rules, their intellectual assets. But we actually did a study on this and found that less than 6% of these assets are ever reported. About 4% are stolen every year. In the US alone, it's about $1 trillion of intellectual assets stolen each year. And by the way, stolen from everywhere. Don't think, they're not interested in universities, and the universities are compromised. Your intellectual property lawyers are compromised. There's wholesale theft of intellectual property. And it's a very important issue because this is the wealth of your nations. Another item of waste was identified by Lord Sainsbury, who was the British Minister of Innovation. And he determined that of all the research and development done around the world, 30% is totally wasted reinventing what someone else has already done. So given that the global expenditure on research and development is $1.6 trillion, that means we're wasting about $500 billion every year. $500 billion that could be well used in many areas of need, including, of course, additional research. So part of our philosophy is, all research should start from the edge of knowledge rather than repeating what's already been done. And that is possible, and we'll explain how later on. The reason this happens, of course, is because much of it is done in secrecy, and so no one knows exactly what is going on around the world. But we can address that. There's a couple of questions coming in. I see, Zayed, do you want me to stop and address them as we go, or leave them to the end? Up to you.
We will leave them to the end. So guys or the audience, please, if you have any question, just record that question and we will go through them to the end, just to maintain the timing, because if we keep going through the questions, we may lose the timing of the lecture.
Okay. Okay. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone could hear and see. Okay. Okay. So basically, to conclude on this slide, the bulk of our intellectual assets are unused, unmanaged, and very often unknown. So the obvious question is why? Why do so few ideas become realized? It's a topic that we became interested in. We, Zayed mentioned the book that we wrote on the topic quite a while ago now. It's quite old. But we looked at the reasons why, identified about 28 reasons why we felt that it's so difficult for ideas to make this difficult journey from inception to realization, and suggested solutions for them. And we got some good reviews shown here on the back of the book. People like Carl Icahn and Sir David Cooksey, who was the chairman of the Bank of England, Lee Iacocca, who turned around Chrysler. So we were encouraged by the reviews and went ahead and put the application, our suggested solutions into practice, and built an application. And we call the company Ideation. And our goal is to enable academic and research institutions to capture, protect, manage, and monetize their IP and use it more effectively to further knowledge and fund future research. It also provides a secure, trusted global community of innovators in which your researchers can collaborate and joint venture, secure in the knowledge that their IP will be protected, both informally in terms of colleagues collaborating together, making sure the attribution is fair, and more globally, being able to collaborate with people interested in the same field on the other side of the world who you can now work with in a more secure, trusted way. We'll come back to that. So, as I said, there's about 28 challenges we found. There's 28 modules in the application, and I won't take up the time and talk about all of them, but let's just mention a few. Visibility. Most organizations don't know what IP they have. I can tell you stories from large Fortune 500 companies that I've worked for, and they gave me a list of all their patents, and it turned out it really wasn't their patents. Half of them weren't theirs, and ones they did have, they'd been missed out. So we actually sent them a list of what they actually did have, and then we realized they didn't know anything about them. Many of them have been acquired from other organizations, and they really had no idea what they had. Theft is, as we've mentioned, a huge issue. $1 trillion a year, just the US alone. Mismanagement, because best practices are rarely applied. In fact, there's little agreement on what best practices are. Secrecy, it's very difficult to market something which is secret. Risk, IP litigation insurance has been generally unavailable, and we're working on that. Licensing, it's a costly and time-consuming process. And of course, funding for early stage innovation is a huge challenge, and leads to what's been called the valley of death, where so many great ideas just never make it out of the gate. So let's look, this is the proverbial valley of death, where early stage companies, particularly that arising from university research, have difficulty obtaining early stage funding. Let's start with the funding. We'll just take a couple of these. We'll take the funding problem and the problem with how to market it while it's still secret. And that's probably all we'll have time for. So let's start with funding. Our approach to solving the funding issue is to provide a kind of crowdfunding, and this one we haven't launched yet, but it's ready to go, and we'll probably be first testing it with the City University of New York. And our philosophy was, the problem with a lot of crowdfunding is it's in exchange for equity. That brings in all the regulators and the Securities and Exchange Commission and thousands of pages of rules, and that slows anything down. So we said, well, instead of giving early stage investors equity, let's give them a share of future royalty revenues that will come in. So here are the building blocks that enable this process. First of all, you've got the innovations, you've got the individuals, you've got organizations, and we allow for virtual organizations, which again takes out some of the friction, makes it much easier, because you can achieve everything with a company, with a virtual company, in terms of who has what, how it's shared, and then the licenses, which define the economic relationship between the parties. So how this works is you have a project, in this case, remote pathogen detection, which came up from 2 companies in our early beta testing. One is kind of topical now. One was had developed a UAV, a micro UAV, the size of a semiconductor chip. And there was a Department of Defense grant for someone who could detect pathogens in a biowarfare scenario. So they had the micro UAV, but they didn't have any means of detecting pathogens. So they teamed up with another company that was able to, did have that technology. And we'll show you later on how they were able to find each other, and created a virtual project where they agreed to share their technologies to explore this DoD grant. So the next step is they identify what technology each of them is contributing and on what terms it's contributed to the project. Then they go for investors. And in many cases, this can be in the university, through the alumni. The alumni have particular expertise in various areas, and they have some funds because they're in the workforce. So they can look at some of these ideas being launched, and particularly in their areas of expertise, and say, yep, I know that was a problem when I was studying, and if these guys have solved it, I'm prepared to chip in $2,000 or $3,000 to help them get a patent, build a prototype, get started. And if they are able, if the project is able to find 2 or 3 people, expert in the field, who are able to say, yeah, I think this is a good idea, we'll put in a few thousand, then we've talked to funds that normally don't invest in early stage projects, but they say, if you've got 2 or 3 subject matter experts who not only say they think it's a good idea, but they've even written out a check, then we'll match it. So we've talked to funds that will come in and match it. So all you need to do is just get a few colleagues or alumni interested. And by the way, with alumni, when they write out the alumni check, traditionally, the only thing they know for sure is they're not going to get 1 cent of it back. But with this project, there's a good chance they could get some money back, and they could even make a nice healthy profit. And they're using their expertise to determine which ones should get it. So now we've got a few alumni coming in, and we've got a matching fund prepared to match it. We've got the project funded. We help them find licensees, and we'll be coming to that in just a little bit. And as the licensees start paying royalties on the project, these go back to the investors and the matching fund. So people like economic development organizations, instead of just going to the government every year to get a grant to give away money, they could create an evergreen fund that will be well informed because of the subject matter experts coming in and voting with their pocketbook. And they will have, and with sufficient successes, the fund will be renewed so it can be a continual process. So we can, happy to answer questions on that. It was rather a quick treatment. Now let's look at the other major problem. I'm just looking at my clock here. We're okay. The other major problem is, how do you market stuff that's secret? And at the moment, basically what people do is they wait. They wait until at least the patent has been published, so it's already known now, and they feel they have some protection through the patent, and then they start marketing it. Or they wait even longer until it's incorporated into a product, and they incorporate it, they market it through the product. We're saying you can do this at a much earlier stage, even while it's still secret. And let's show you how. So the problem we're discussing, we call the inventor's dilemma. We get a great idea. We know we should be talking to everyone, joint venturing, but we don't, because we're terrified that each person we talk to could be the person who steals the idea and runs off with it as their own. And this isn't a paranoid feeling. This is reality. We're just, every day almost, we hear stories of people who've had their ideas stolen. And it's tragic, because you get a great idea. This is, this is like a baby. It's really important to you. And it's terribly demoralizing to have someone run off and take it. It could be your boss. It could be a complete stranger. It could be a state that's hacked into your system and got it, and it suddenly appears on the other side of the world, and you have no idea where they got it from. It came from you. So we keep these things secret, but at the same time, we're keeping it away from hundreds of non-competitive potential collaborators who do not even know of your existence. We can help solve this problem of how to market and license your innovation while still maintaining confidentiality. And I'll take you through a few steps. So bear with me, and I'll be happy to answer questions. We'll leave plenty of time for that. So, and I'll go a little quicker so we do have time for your questions. So the first step is you register the idea. And you don't have to wait until it's a formal patent. You can register the part ideas just as soon as you think of them. It's basically just like a lab notebook. It's an electronic lab notebook. 2 parts, the marketing abstract and the proprietary content. The marketing abstract, this is the problem I've solved. Proprietary content, this is how I solve it. And we separate them so you can have different security levels on them. And you've got all the time choices on security. It can be in the clear, you can have it encrypted, even before it leaves your browser, or to be extremely cautious, just the message digest. This is the cryptographic hash only. It's mathematically, physically impossible to reconstruct your idea just from the hash, but it proves you thought of that idea at that date and time. It's time-stamped, added to the blockchain, and stored in a very secure crypt. And everything is tracked. And then if you allow access to that, that also is tracked, time-stamped, and that access is stored on the blockchain. Now, not the idea itself, just the hash that shows that you can prove you had the idea. So nothing proprietary is stored on the blockchain, just the hash of it, the cryptographic hash. And we talked about the marketing abstract and the proprietary content. You can set access in 2 ways. Hierarchically, which is quick and easy. Just me, just the department, the business unit, anyone in the organization, anyone who signed an NDA, or the general public. But having done that, you can also have specific includes and excludes. For instance, you might exclude your 3 immediate competitors. And there'll be includes, your external IP lawyer, for instance, you may want him to have access. And the proprietary content, same thing, but it's much tighter controlled. And for the cybersecurity itself, there's kind of 3 approaches. X-quantum messaging is developed by actually a friend of the Middle East. He came out, Junaid Islam. He came out for a particular nation, I won't mention which one, that had a problem, contacted the State Department. The State Department contacted the CIA. they said they wanted just one person to come out. They didn't want a team. And the CIA recommended Junaid, who's our security expert. And he went out, told them who was attacking them within the first day, and then a couple of days later secured their servers and protected them from attack. And he developed the only broad infrastructure called SDP, which has never been attacked, but it was complicated and expensive. So he sold that company, and then he is now creating something called X-quantum messaging, which will protect your data even from quantum computer attacks, because certain states have acquired quantum computers and are using them to break cryptographic keys. So many of the asymmetric keys are now compromised, but this technology is not, and nor is this. So that protects the data while it's moving. FHE, fully homomorphic encryption, is not compromised, and it can protect the data at rest, and it has a unique property. Normally with encryption, once you've encrypted that file, you can do nothing with it. You can't search it, you can't operate on it. However, with fully homomorphic encryption, you can encrypt it, but you can still search for keywords using something called an operating key. And that's an important property, and we'll come back to that. And then user behavior analytics just protects from malicious authorized users, your insiders. If suddenly there's a change in their pattern of behavior, you can flag that and escalate the security protections on that particular information or for that particular person. So how this works in practice. And this is from some screenshots, actually an older interface, but it makes the point. The example I mentioned earlier, the company with the UAV, they joined up, they put in their areas of interest, because we asked people just to put in their profile, which they can keep secret, by the way. And they put in UAV and thrust and microlithography, but because of this Department of Defense grant, they also put in the words microbial detection. They knew nothing about it. They wanted to know if anyone had that technology. 2 weeks later, just by chance, a company called BioVigilant, which works on microbial detection, put in their information, and that triggered this for Michael Gadamian, the founder of this company, which is called NEMSET. And it just showed up, new in your interest area, innovations, microbial detection 1. All that's telling him is that someone somewhere, some user of Ideation, has entered in technology related to microbial detection. It doesn't tell them who it is, and it doesn't tell them what it is. But it does allow him to do one thing. He can click on this keyword, and it brings up a message box that he can complete, which will send a message to the owner of the technology, typically saying, I don't think we're competitors, but we're interested in microbial detection for a Department of Defense grant. Would you be interested in collaborating with us? And everyone starts off anonymous, but they have the option to waive it, which makes it go a little quicker. If they don't, they can exchange a few messages until they're comfortable with each other and trust each other, then they go ahead. So what's going on in the background while this happens? How do we make it work? Well, we mentioned the BioVigilant. They had their technology. They registered it with us. And as they do so, it's encrypted with FHE before it leaves their browser. So all we get is an encrypted document. We can't read it, but we can search for keywords, as I said, because we have the operating key. We also register it on the blockchain so that they have the attestation trail. If they later on get in patent litigation or something, they can prove that they thought of it at this date and time. Now, meanwhile, the other client, Michael Gadamian of NEMSET, put in their microbial detection keyword. We have that keyword and we encrypt it because, you know, even if someone was to break our perimeter security, we won't want anyone knowing what people are interested in because it gives away their future strategic direction. But we're able to run that encrypted keyword against the encrypted documents, all the encrypted keywords against all the encrypted documents. And if we find any matches, we then notify this client of that match, which is the message we saw in the last slide. And they are able to send a message to the owner of the technology requesting access. And if that owner of the technology decides to grant the access, because the client B can attach an NDA, we have a smart contract 2-click NDA that can be simply attached in seconds. So client A gets the request, nothing's been compromised in their security. They get the request, they see it comes from someone who isn't a competitor, and there's an NDA with it. They say, okay, we can show it to these people. So they go ahead and they allow them to see the information in the clear. And if client B, in this case, NEMSET, is interested, they can go ahead and license it, or the two of them can create a joint venture to jointly produce the solution. And all of these transactions, again, recorded on the blockchain. So in this way, you don't even have to have a patent. You can trade secrets. People have always thought of trade secrets as being something just kept secret within the company, and you have to. Or else you lose the protection of that trade secret. But you can actually keep it secret within the company, but still be marketing it throughout the world. This is the kind of the paradox, and this is why we're very excited about this, because we see this as a way to advance technology 5 years. Why 5 years? Because the average time it takes from the inception of the idea to the patent being published is about 5 years. So now, the minute you have the idea, you can be marketing it throughout the world without compromising your confidentiality. Okay, so each idea is kind of registered as an encrypted document, but it doesn't just sit there on a server doing nothing. Because of this technology, other people who are interested in this area can become aware of it, and they can send messages to the owner of the idea requesting access or suggesting they can help as a subject matter expert, or they'd like to provide design or manufacturing expertise or legal expertise. And each idea can create its own virtual ecosystem without having to compromise its confidentiality. And each partnership it enters into has a mutual NDA and recognition and agreement of the contribution and how they'll be rewarded, which can be through the earlier system we mentioned of providing a share of IP royalty. So now we've got ecosystems building around the world, and they can all connect with each other. In one example, the City University of New York has the encryption technology that InfoShield provide that we use as well. The other side of the world, an IP lawyer in India has Tata as a client. They can become aware of this technology, which they wouldn't have done normally, go ahead and license it through this connection of ecosystems. Everyone keeps it confidential, but they can be connected. So now, as we mentioned, you don't have to wait 5 years. You can actually start licensing it as soon as you've registered your idea. So we skipped many modules because of time limits, but these are, the overall. In fact, this isn't all 28. I think it's about 20. And what we're trying to do is bring university and industry collaboration together. If you think about R&D, basically, research is taking dollars and turning it into innovation, and development is taking the innovation and turning it into dollars. And this should be a virtuous circle between academia and industry. And any organization using this can white label it. As you'll see in a minute, we give it away for free, and you can take the credit for it. You put your own logo at the top, because we just want this everywhere and everyone collaborating. So what we're trying to do is to enable collective creativity. There's been plenty of research that shows that two smart people working together can be much more creative than the smart people working alone. We're trying to bring all these smart people, including our audience here, together for the collective benefit of the world. We won't have time to talk about sovereign patent funds, but this is quite a good way of implementing it. And I think an interesting tool of economic development. So that's it. We'll leave 12 minutes for questions, and I'll hand over to Zayed. Shall I stop sharing now, Zayed?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for the very informative lecture. And I have lots of questions in advance of the lecture came from our audience. الحضور الكرام إذا أحد عنده سؤال يقدر يكتبه. أنا راح أطرح سؤالين أو ثلاثة وبعدين أخذ حضوركم. I have a question, a comment and then a question, Douglas. You know, for economists, the role of the market is to distribute goods efficiently. And in a competitive market, efficient market, goods are distributed to consumers at marginal cost. But for information goods, if we supply them or if we sell them in a marginal cost, that will be uneconomical for anyone to produce them, because the very high fixed cost of production. So let's take an example of a book. In order to publish a book, you will invest lots of resources in researching, reading, trying to publish it. And this is a high cost. But once the book is published and it's out in the libraries, the matter of producing another copy of it is just a matter of copying. So the question, this is where the challenge lies, how to get the innovations funded at their earliest stage, which is the most costly one.
Exactly. In fact, that's a very interesting question, because that's the nux of this issue, is that intellectual property has almost a zero marginal cost. So the way to benefit from it is to use it as broadly as possible, because there is a distinction. Intellectual assets are non-depleting assets. A physical asset, even a book, can only be used in one place at one time. But an intellectual asset can be used in many different applications, different industries, different geographies, all at the same time. And a very quick example, American Airlines, they spent $40 billion building the fleet, and about 40 million, not billion, building the Sabre reservation system. They started letting other people use the Sabre system, and eventually they spun it out as a separate company. When they sold it for half the value of American Airlines, even though it was only a fraction, a thousandth of the cost. Because it was a non-depleting asset, could be used everywhere by hotel companies, car rental, different airlines. So that's the point. It can be shared very inexpensively with vast numbers of people. And that's what, but it isn't happening because it's so secret. And that's what we're trying to solve.
Thank you. And in terms of investing in higher education, economic growth can be stimulated by an increase in human capital. So investment in education, training should be considered as investment in human capital, because people cannot be separate from their knowledge, skills, health, or values in the same way they can be separate from their financial and physical assets. So here, regarding universities, what do you think that the universities should do in terms of investing in IP? And what opportunities can be created here for them? Because it seems like this is underestimated.
In some ways they are investing in IP already, but they're not protecting it. And they're not valuing it, really. I mean, we create these brilliant students, but we're not really harvesting the ideas they're having. Or sometimes, by the way, they get stolen by professors, or sometimes professors' work gets stolen by the students.
Yes.
So we're not protecting the IP, We're certainly not protecting it from state-sponsored attackers, and we're not giving them a means of utilizing and commercializing it once it's done. So the investment is there. It can be greater, but what's even more important is harnessing it, managing it, protecting it.
Yeah, great. So yeah, we all agree that we need to protect innovations from what we call free riders. And here, you mentioned patents, and the trade secrets. So what level of incentive do patents provide? And is this incentive level different from the trade secrets? This is because people sometimes, when they hear about the patent and how much does it cost, how long does it take, they will just sit back and forget about it.
Yes, and this is a controversial topic. There's kind of an anti-patent group, and I don't necessarily subscribe to that thinking. I think the way I would put it is that you no longer need to be limited to a patent. For instance, in academia, typically, less than 5% of the ideas get approved by the patent committee to spend the money on getting a patent. And of course, a patent is a very expensive process. If you're getting a patent protected globally through a family of patents, the average cost is about $400,000 over the term of the patent. Yeah. But only 1% of them are ever licensed. So that's about $40 million as a cost for every patent that actually is being licensed. So it's very expensive. And the other side of that is, even though you've invested that money and you have the protection, if someone infringes you, a large company, there's virtually nothing you can do about it. You can say, hey, you're infringing, and they say, well, okay, go ahead and sue us. And if you don't have that extra $5 or $10 million, which will be the retainer to hire a patent lawyer to sue, then you're out of luck. Whereas now there's another way you can do it. You can keep it as a trade secret, license it, and market it. And this is what we actually tested in Ukraine, because Ukraine has 20, 30,000 brilliant PhD scientists, but they're all getting by on just a few $100s a month, and they can't afford the patent. So we're saying you can register as a trade secret, and people on the other side of the world can find you and license it.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience. Mr. Ala, he's from Washington State University. He said, can we explore the possibility of setting time limit for intellectual property, after which it can be freely accessed and used by the public in order to limit monopoly and expand the benefits of breakthroughs, especially in medicine and technology?
That's also an interesting question. With patents, it's kind of defined, the time limit. The trade between the government is to give you a 20-year monopoly in exchange for your secrets. Yeah. But with trade secrets, you can structure that how you want. Yeah. So I think the market can determine that. And I agree that too much technology is acquired and shelved for purely commercial reasons. So I think we could introduce that. And I think this is the great thing about trade secrets. And by the way, one of our colleagues is the person who invented the term trade secret back in 1995. And he would very much like to see this broadly adopted and used. He's now in his mid-90s, so he's telling us to hurry up and get it done.
Yeah, we have another question from Zina Fauzi. She's from University of Technology in Iraq. She said, are there any consistent global standards for identifying and legally maintaining the intellectual property?
Yes, I mean, obviously there are with patents, although it's a patchwork. They are moving towards uniformity, and they have done with the taxonomy of how to define it. And with trade secrets, it's even more of a patchwork. There's little law on it, but each country has slightly different laws. In the States, they have brought together the different trade secret laws for each state under the Trade Secrets Act, I think it was called. And what we're suggesting is there can almost be a free market convention because with trade secrets now, we can free it up, and we can try and set fair and equitable terms. And we've already developed principles which include things like the gentleman from Washington State University's request to try and ensure that IP doesn't get taken up and hidden.
Yeah. Let me just talk to the audience. الأخوة الكرام اللي يسجلون اسمهم والإيميل، ماكو عندنا شهادات حضور ولا رابط تسجيل للأسف، لأنه الندوة بناء على مبادرة شخصية. فأرجو اللي عنده فقط سؤال يكتبه، فقط سؤال، لا نحتاج إلى الأسماء ولا الإيميلات. Another question came, said, how are violations of intellectual property rights between countries or companies are being addressed now? What is the cost? What is the way? So if you have been, if your idea has been stolen.
There's several treaties. There's treaties specifically related to patents. There's treaties related to copyright. And of course, it's under a treaty, the PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, I think it is, that the global patent system was developed. So there are treaties, they're complicated, and they don't really apply properly to trade secrets. So there is, I think, we're entering the generation of trade secrets. I think they're going to rise up. No longer will they just be viewed as something for the individual company, but they'll be part of global cooperation.
Yeah, I'm trying to see some questions. How are the forms of support for the purpose of building an insurance policy to protect the property rights and be supported by international institutions? Actually, we have a problem. Lots of people are sent from the Middle East to study in foreign universities. And some, the majority of them are clever scholars, and they came up with ideas and innovations. However, there is a big discussion ongoing who owns what, because you are sponsored by your university, let's say in Iraq, but you are working in another university in the UK, and you are the one who come up with the idea. So it's a dilemma. But any ideas on how to protect yourself from the very beginning in such a situation?
Well, one is to at least record what's happened and to confirm who thought of it. It's true that the universities do have a claim on the IP often, and if there's two universities involved, there might be some conflicts there. We allow people to belong to multiple organizations. So if they're working on behalf of one entity or one university, they can register their innovation in that role, or they can switch to the other university. And obviously this, they have to follow the dictates of their individual universities. But the important thing is to register the idea as it's thought of, and that at least gives a basis for the discussion about how the rights will be shared. We encourage and enable those agreements to be reached ahead of time, so they can say, okay, it'll be 50-50 between the universities, or a third to one university, a third to the other university, and a third to the inventor, which we think is very important to incent the individual inventor and make sure they're part of the ongoing process.
Yeah, and back to our discussion yesterday, you said that IP can create opportunities for the economy. Can you just elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, because it enables, well, for one thing, if you look at, I showed you earlier the data on the tiny share of the global economy from licensing IP, 365 billion, I think it was. What it didn't mention was that its CAGR is 12.7%, whereas the CAGR for the physical economy is about 1.7%. So intellectual property, although currently a very small portion of the global economy, is growing at a very fast rate. So because of this is why I think it's important to be investing in IP to support the economy. It supports it because it helps small companies get started and survive and get across that valley of death. And it's important because you can start now licensing the IP much earlier. You don't have to wait until the patent's published. And also for those people that don't get a patent, the 95% of university projects that don't get a patent, you can market it as a trade secret, and you can also participate in the crowdfunding program we talked about when we launched that, which will probably be later this year.
Yeah. Okay, with that, because I believe that you will be in another call shortly.
Yeah, I'm okay with time, but you
yes, yeah, if you are okay. Let's see if there are any other questions. I have especially, how can we apply ideas in communities without, guys, the questions should relate to ideation and intellectual property. We cannot discuss, it's you know, it has lots of sides that we can discuss it, but we need to focus on IP. إذا عندكم أي سؤال على حقوق الملكية الفكرية، مشاكلها بالجامعات، أو أي سؤال آخر من هذا النوع، ممكن نوجهه. بعض الأسئلة دا أقراها للأسف بعيدة بعض الشيء عن الموضوع. Douglas, can you please share a slide for which include your contact details? So.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll start sharing again. I'll bring it up. Oh, and let me mention, yeah. I said it's free. At the moment, it's free and it'll be on the slide that I'm about to bring up, by using the discount code GRAT. So you can just come to our site, ideation.com. I'm bringing up the screen now.
Yeah.
And let me just maximize the screen.
Yeah, so is it GR?
GRAT. It's right at the bottom of this slide here, which I'm maximizing.
Ah, yes, yes.
Down here. GRAT. Now, in about another 2 weeks, we're revamping the whole project, and we're making the interface a little bit easier. And you'll just be able to come in and log in, and then you can upgrade later if you want. Yeah, but for now, it's a free account. Yeah. Use the keyword GRAT, and you'll be able to join. Yeah. If you have any questions, because it is a bit complicated, because that's the nature of this animal. Yeah. Please feel free to contact us. There's the contact information. We'll be happy to talk you through, give advice, help you in any way you want. And as I say, yeah. we're not charging anyone at this point.
Thank you very much. Let me just put that in Arabic in a bit. الأخوة الكرام الحاضرين الموجود.
This is the special Zayed discount.
Thank you very much. المعلومات اللي موجودة على الشاشة الآن هي معلومات الاتصال بالسيد دوغلاس ومعلومات موقع Ideation، والآن موفرين للحاضرين هذه المحاضرة كود هي GRAT، استخدموها بالتسجيل وراح يكون لكم حساب مجاني. الحساب على الشركة راح يوفر لكم كل الخواص اللي انذكرت من المحاضرة، من المحافظة على الفكرة، محاولة إيجاد تمويل للأفكار، الدخول في مجال الأسرار التجارية وغيرها. هي معقدة بعض الشيء، لكن ممكن إيجاد الكثير من المعلومات على موقعهم بهذا الخصوص لحماية حقوق الملكية الفكرية لأفكاركم، خصوصا العاملين في مجالات البحث بالقطاع الطبي أو الهندسية أو أي مجال آخر. I just put that in Arabic, Douglas, for them to encourage them. I say it's sometimes a bit complicated to understand the mechanism of the ideation, but do you have any videos or any learning materials that we can share?
We're bringing them up. We've got one at the moment, but we'll bring up more. And this is why I'm saying, if any of them have any questions, just call us up or send us an email, because we're only in beta at the moment, but we're very happy to help anyone who wants to use it. And we realize that we're making more videos, so it'll become easier. But for now, tell them just to contact us. We'll help them.
Yeah. أي أحد عنده سؤال، ذكر السيد دوغلاس إنه يقدرون تتصلون بهم. راح تكون هناك مادة تعليمية قريبا ترسل، وأنا عندي كل إيميلات المسجلين وإن شاء الله نرسلها لكم. Okay, Douglas, I think in the US there are kind of job universities that depend on the case of person that work. What do you think of? Can you read the chat, Douglas?
Can I what, sorry?
Can you read the chat? There is a chat icon down there. If you can click on it.
Hold on, let me. It's in the chat box.
Yeah, it's just the chat.
Under the Q&A, yes.
There we have a Q. I haven't seen the Q&A yet. Unfortunately, most of them in Arabic, but we covered them. Here's a question from Dr. Bilal Al-Obaidi. He said, at the beginning you mentioned the waste of 30% for reinvention of the already existing inventions. What's your recommendation to avoid this waste?
It's because when you start, just as we showed you how secret projects can find other secret projects, before you start the research, you can search on Ideation. And at the moment, there's not a lot of users, but we actually have an answer for that. We have a global gateway so that Google and Bing searches can access it. But as we grow, you'll be able to search, find other projects working in the same area, and you can communicate with them, and then perhaps agree not to duplicate the work, but to share the work, take one aspect and the other, so that you're not overlapping and wasting research funds.
Yeah, that's great. And دكتور حمزة فائق، عفوا شنو سؤالك دكتور؟ إذا ممكن تطرحه من جديد. Hope you can have another meeting. Some people asking for another meeting.
Well, I'll be happy anytime at your convenience.
Yeah, I will see how to arrange another meeting, which can be more technical in terms of explaining how ideation works, or if you can prepare something to clarify how to join, to give an example, and that would be great. But
we can do a demo, show how to sign up, create your profile, and participate. We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay, for now we have to bring this to an end because we already planned for 1 hour. I would like to thank you very much, Douglas, for your time, efforts, and for the very informative webinar. Also, the thanks goes to Roxanne for liaising and for managing it and trying to put things together. We will have another. I will liaise with Mr. Douglas and try to have another webinar to go more into details of the how ideation works and how to join, how to make use of this platform. شكرا جزيلا للأخوة الحضور الكرام. أتمنى كانت محاضرة مفيدة. راح تكون هناك محاضرة أخرى نحاول ننظم مع السيد المتحدث، وجزيل الشكر لكم ولحضوركم.